A newly elected mayor now takes office amid whispers that foreign designated terrorist organizations played a role in his ascent. What I'm going to talk to you about today is how Hamas made a king in New York. I'm going to show you how the funding that Mamdani received is politically connected to Hamas, according to the FBI, the DOJ, and how his vocal advocates and supporters have urged that once he gets in office, he needs to pay back those powerful donors. Today, I'm going to talk to you about CAIR, foreign funding, campaign financing, and the mayor of New York's connection to it. And I'm going to lay brick by brick how the DOJ will likely make its case into terror-connected financing of a U.S. municipal election. I'm Ron Chapman. This is Off Air. Thank you for joining me. By the end of this episode, you will see that this election is not clean and that there is terrorism funding ultimately in the coffers of the current New York mayor. As New York Assemblyman Zohran Mandani launched his underdog bid for mayor, an unusual funding pipeline quietly sprang to life behind the scenes. Money began flowing into the race not just from small dollar donors in the 5 boroughs, but a cross-country network of nonprofits and political committees linked to the Council on American-Islamic Relations, a controversial Muslim civil rights group with international entanglements. This investigative narrative follows the chronological trail of those funds. It reveals how CAIR's nonprofit affiliates and super PAC, named Unity and Justice Fund, routed hundreds of thousands of dollars into pro-Mamdani election efforts, and we will illuminate the documented ties and red flags surrounding that network. For those who don't know, Mamdani, a 32-year-old democratic socialist and son of Ugandan Indian filmmaker Mira Nair, entered the 2025 New York City mayoral contest, positioning himself as a progressive champion. He rode a wave of grassroots enthusiasm, promising hefty taxes on the rich, rent freezes, and radical criminal justice reforms, including disbanding the anti-terrorism team. By early 2025, Mamdani had surged to frontrunner status in the Democratic Party, outpacing establishment figures like former Governor Andrew Cuomo. Yet, unbeknownst to most voters, some of the biggest boosts to Mamdani's grassroots rise were coming from outside of New York City. Some were coming from outside of the United States, and some were coming from international groups connected to terrorism. Let's talk about the Council on American-Islamic Relations, CAIR. This is a Washington, D.C. based 501c3 nonprofit that builds itself as a Muslim civil rights and advocacy group. But as a tax-exempt charity, CAIR is legally prohibited from engaging in any political activity. In fact, it's absolutely forbidden to directly or indirectly participate in a political campaign or on behalf of or in opposition to any political candidate. Nonetheless, CAIR's leaders have long sought to amplify Muslim political power. To navigate legal restrictions, CAIR spun off an affiliate called CAIR Action. CAIR Action was established as a 501c4, different from a C3. This is a social welfare organization, specifically to be the voice of American Muslims in the political process. Certainly nothing wrong with that. Unlike its parent charity, a 501c4 may engage in some election-related activity, though partisan campaigning cannot be its primary purpose. That's important. In June 2024, a new super PAC was registered with the Federal Election Commission under the name Unity and Justice Fund, UJF. Now, on paper, UJF was an independent expenditure-only committee, a super PAC, unaffiliated with any candidate. But clues to its allegiance were visible from inception. UJF's mailing address, 1930 Street Northwest, Washington, B2, number 1190, is exactly the same address used by CAIR. It's exactly the same address used by CAIR Action as well. In essence, UJF was a political action arm emerging from CAIR's activist network. Eric Sunderland, listed as UJF's treasurer, had previously been associated with progressive causes, and CAIR Action's leadership oversaw UJF's formation. These groups are not just closely connected, they are the same thing. Public records and nonprofit disclosures later confirmed what observers suspected. CAIR Action effectively controlled the Unity and Justice Fund. Illegal campaign contributions laundered into legal campaign contributions. Rounding out this ecosystem was a New York-based super PAC innocuously named New Yorkers for Lower Costs. This committee had been formed to support Mandani's mayoral ambitions, a vehicle to spend on his behalf, independent of the official campaign and independent of a lot of laws. For much of 2024, New Yorkers for Lower Costs flew under the radar, raising money from left-leaning donors and interest groups aligned with Mandani's platform. But it would soon receive an outside infusion from far afield. Early warnings showed that this might be connected to dirty money. Even as Mandani's campaign gained momentum, it began to draw scrutiny for unusual funding patterns. In the spring of 2024, Mandani's team unwittingly accepted thousands of dollars in contributions from individuals overseas. This has been widely reported. This triggered alarms about foreign nationals bankrolling a U.S. election. By law, foreign nationals may not participate in American elections, and for good reason. We don't want people buying our politicians. And that includes making contributions. As campaign finance experts have explained, this would create a system where the rest of the world donates and causes certain politicians to be in office. In fact, federal law flatly prohibits campaigns from accepting donations from foreign donors in any way, and New York City's campaign code mirrors that. Now, if a campaign discovers such illegal funds, it must refund them immediately or face penalties. Unfortunately, Mandani's campaign would eventually acknowledge receiving nearly $13,000 from at least 170 donors with addresses outside of the United States. It may not seem like a big problem, but it's something that they ignored. This included a maxed-out donation from his mother-in-law in the amount of about $2,100. Doesn't sound like a very big deal. But starting in September 2025, as Watchdogs sounded the alarm, Mandani's team quietly began refunding the dubious contributions. In October, roughly $9,000 in foreign donations had been returned. But the candidate's staff still maintained that some of the overseas contributions came from U.S. citizens living abroad, but could not prove it. They attributed any infractions to clerical oversight. But to campaign watchdogs, the pattern looked far more deliberate because of its scope. According to one, this was a sustained pattern of foreign money flowing into a New York City mayoral race, a clear violation of both federal law and New York City campaign finance rules. That was Dan Backer, president of the nonpartisan Coolidge-Reagan Foundation, which filed formal complaints in October. In Becker's assessment, Mandani's campaign had been on notice for months, yet did nothing meaningful to stop the influx prohibited until the press started to surround the issue. These direct foreign donor violations set the stage and context of something very suspicious. As investigators probed Mandani's books for illegal contributions, a parallel question loomed. Were foreign or illicit funds also reaching the campaign indirectly, via ostensibly domestic nonprofit groups? It's here that the CAIR network enters the story in a very major and potentially illegal way. On May 30th, 2024, New Yorkers for Lower Costs, the pro-Mandani super PAC that I mentioned earlier, received a $25,000 donation that raised few eyebrows at first. 2 weeks later, on June 16th, 2024, the PAC's coffers swelled with another $75,000 contribution. Both payments came from the Unity and Justice Fund. Remember, that's CAIR's Washington-based super PAC. This totaled a $100,000 investment in Mandani's campaign. These transactions were quietly noted in campaign finance filings. Only in mid-2025 did their significance become clear when journalists and researchers traced the money back to its source. The Washington Free Beacon first reported that CAIR and Unity Justice Fund had quietly funded Mamdani's mayoral campaign to the tune of $100,000, citing official campaign records. At that point, with Mamdani surging in the polls as a result of this support and his outspoken anti-Israel stance drawing attention, the revelation sparked public debate. The backing of the Unity and Justice Fund was responsible. According to one campaign watchdog, the backing of the Unity and Justice Fund, other anti-Israeli organizations suggests the PAC's true interest in Mamdani lies in his anti-Israel views, the Free Beacon noted, pointing out that Mamdani had refused to acknowledge Israel's right to exist and embraced slogans publicly, like globalize the Intifada, during the campaign. Over the following months, CAIR's political machine would pour even more resources into New York. According to public disclosures, the Unity and Justice Fund ultimately gave a total of $120,000 to New Yorkers for lower costs. Remember, that was that separate PAC that was set up for Mamdani. This was given over the course of the election, making CAIR's network the largest institutional donor that pro-Mamdani super PACs provided. Out of a roughly $3 million raised by the PAC, over $120,000, 4% of the total contributions, came from CAIR's Unity and Justice Fund alone. By comparison, most other donors to the PAC were local unions, progressive advocacy groups, and left-wing philanthropists. None matched the size of CAIR's contributions in dollars. Importantly, the money moving through UJF appears to trace back to CAIR itself and a suspicious figure named Linda Sarsour. Linda Sarsour is a Palestinian-American activist who has mentored Mamdani. She's publicly admitted in late 2025 that the Unity and Justice Fund was controlled by CAIR. Speaking on a panel at CAIR's national conference, Sarsour boasted that CAIR, which she noted was Hamas-linked, had become the biggest financial backer of the Mamdani's race. They owned Mamdani. She described UJF as the largest institutional donor to the pro-Zohran super PAC. This was not idle chatter. Multiple public records confirmed that CAIR, UJF, and Mamdani had a pipeline. Indeed, CAIR Action, the 501c4 arm, light political activity was allowed, directly funneled money to the Unity and Justice Fund PAC, which in turn sent at least $120,000 into New Yorkers for lower costs. Mamdani's super PAC. In effect, CAIR had used its profit affiliates to engineer a significant independent expenditure on behalf of Mamdani. The arrangement neatly bypassed restrictions that would have prevented CAIR's charitable dollars from going to a public candidate. If CAIR's tax-exempt funds could not legally touch an election, CAIR Action's general treasury, potentially bolstered by private donors, grants, or even foreign sources, could bankroll a super PAC, which in turn could spend unlimited funds supporting a friendly candidate, funds potentially linked to terrorism. To all outward appearances, the donations from UJF to the New York PAC were just like any other PAC contribution. They concealed the original source, though, by two layers. This kind of routing is not technically illegal on its face, but it is if it's traced to illegal donations from foreign actors. What was the true origin of the money that CAIR's network delivered to the NYC mayoral race? Did any of it violate the ban on foreign funding? I'm going to answer these questions. Following the addresses and affiliations, answering those questions requires mapping the affiliations among these entities. Let's do that now. Start with the Unity and Justice Fund, Washington, D.C. There's an address there, 1930 Street. That's the same address as all of the other entities. A simple cross-check shows that this exact suite is listed as the contract address for CAIR Action. You could do that search right now. CAIR's political activity. is also connected to the same organization. In other words, the super PAC is housed within CAIR Action's offices, merely a cubicle inside of a suite, strongly indicating that the two are organizationally intertwined, not just sharing space. The treasurer of UJF, Eric Sunderland, is a political consultant who's worked with advocacy groups aligned with CAIR's interests, and records show coordination between CAIR Action staff and UJF's activities in 2024. For example, they shared administrative services and overlapping contracts according to Federal Election Commission filings. Furthermore, CAIR Action's own federal PAC, modestly named CAIR Action PAC, registered a statement of organization listing the same suite address and even the same custodian of records as UJF. These overlapping details matter when it comes to federal elections. They underscore that UJF was not a rogue actor, but a deliberate creation of CAIR's lobbying arm. Meanwhile, in New York, New Yorkers for Lower Costs, Mamdani's PAC, operated as an ostensibly independent pro-Mamdani super PAC, hoping that nobody would see the connection. But its ties to the candidate's circle were visible. The PAC was chaired by progressive activists allied with Mamdani's platform, and its communications often mirrored the campaign's messaging. Though legally it could not coordinate strategy with the campaign, mirrored messaging is a strong signal that they are acting in concert. The PAC's name, emphasizing lower costs, played to one of Mamdani's signature issues, reducing living expenses in the city. It paid for field organizers canvassing on Mamdani's behalf. It funded supportive mailers and ran digital ads boasting his promises of rent control and taxing millionaires. By mid-2025, the PAC had raised around $3 million, tapping many of the same donor communities that supported the other left-wing candidates. But the single largest institutional donor on its rolls remained CAIR, Unity and Justice. But the single largest institutional donor on its rolls remained CAIR's Unity and Justice Fund, far surpassing any contribution from local community organizations. Public filings from the New York City's Campaign Finance Board confirm the timeline and amounts of UJF's contributions. The $25,000 on May 30th, 2024, and $75,000 on June 16th, 2024, were documented in the PAC's disclosure. Additional contributions later brought UJF's total to $120,000 by the general election. These figures only came to light in news reports months afterward, but within Mamdani's inner circle, the support from CAIR's network was well understood. That controversial figure I mentioned earlier, Linda Sarsour, who helped rally Muslim American support for Mamdani, alluded this coordination in a video just before Election Day. If Mamdani won, she declared he would owe his victory to the activists who helped him get there, pointing specifically to CAIR's backing. Sarsour vowed that once the election was over, she would reveal details about Mamdani's rapid rise and the financial backing behind it. In the same breath, she issued a warning. Should Mamdani waver in delivering on his leftist, pro-radical promises, Sarsour and her allies, including CAIR, would be the people outside City Hall reminding him who propelled him into office. Evidence of a coordinated effort was clear. The convergence of Mamdani's campaign with CAIR's network did not happen in a vacuum. It was cultivated through personal relationships and aligned agendas. Mamdani and Linda Sarsour share membership in the Democratic Socialists of America and have collaborated on activist causes routinely. In fact, Sarsour was a mentor to Mamdani and a reason he came up in the organization. Sarsour, a New York City organizer known for her Palestinian advocacy and controversial rhetoric, became a close mentor of Mamdani in his political career. It was Sarsour who introduced him to national Muslim advocacy circles, and according to her own account, helped secure CAIR's financial support for him. In a sense, she acted as a bridge between Mamdani's municipal campaign and CAIR's national network. The partnership was mutually beneficial. Mandani gained potent fundraising allies with access to wealthy Muslim Americans, as well as foreign fundraising networks, while CAIR gained a rising political star who openly championed their causes. Mamdani was one of the few U.S. politicians to endorse the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement against Israel. He was also one of the only candidates to refuse to affirm Israel's right to exist. These stances aligned directly with CAIR's hardline. Eager to bolster such a candidate, CAIR's leadership appears to have mobilized resources accordingly. International communications obtained by congressional investigators suggest that CAIR's chapters were encouraged to donate to CAIR Action or UJF in support of a friend in NYC. Wording that, while explicitly naming Mandani, lines up with the timing of UJF's contributions in late spring of 2024. At least one CAIR board member's family foundation contributed to CAIR, which then increased its budget for, quote, civic engagement projects in New York that year. According to 2024 nonprofit Filings, the budget was in fact increased. The New York-based PAC, New Yorkers for Lower Costs, listed as its treasurer a compliance firm that coincidentally also handled state-level filings for CAIR Action's New York chapter. And an intriguing detail from city records, two staffers from the Islamic Circle of America, another Islamist-leaning nonprofit, each made small dollar donations to Mandani's campaign, $650 each, no big deal. Because of New York City's generous public matching funds program, those ICNA staff contributions, $650, amounted to $1,300, were matched 6-to-1 with taxpayer funds, yielding $7,700 for Mamdani. In essence, a few activists' personal donations unlocked a windfall of public funds for the candidate, and this happened with every other donation. While perfectly legal, this illustrates how aligned networks of donors, even as individuals, coordinated to boost Mamdani's financing through every channel available. Let's get to the most troubling part. Why is CAIR so important? Well, CAIR is very clearly linked to Hamas, and Hamas is clearly linked to terrorism. To fully appreciate why the CAIR-linked funding of Mamdani's campaign raises eyebrows, one must understand CAIR's own history and foreign affiliations. Founded in 1994, CAIR has roots in a Hamas support network that operated in the United States in the 1980s and the 1990s. During a 1993 summit of U.S.-based Muslim Brotherhood leaders in Philadelphia, plans were laid to create a new front organization in Washington that could, quote, appear legitimate and avoid an Islamic hue. While secretly serving Hamas's cause, they would fund campaigns and engage in political action. Evidence from the Holy Land Foundation terrorism-financing trial brought by the Department of Justice noted an international meeting agenda and an exhibit, Ashkar Search 4, an exhibit at that trial, captures these conspiratorial discussions and extremism. Conspirators anticipated that Hamas would soon be designated as a terrorist organization in the U.S. and agreed that war is deception. They would deceive the American public about their true objectives while continuing to support Hamas behind closed doors. According to trial testimony by FBI Special Agent Laura Burns, that meeting resulted directly in the creation of the Council on Islamic Relations, CAIR. Two prominent leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood's Palestine Committee in America, Nihad Awad and Omar Ahmad, went on to found CAIR in 1994, just months after the Philadelphia Summit Fund. In fact, minutes from a subsequent Brotherhood meeting in 1994 list CAIR as the newest organization under the committee's umbrella alongside the Holy Land Foundation. These were both fronts for Hamas and extremism. There's no doubt about it. These documents, they came from the United States versus HLF, a trial are labeled Philly meeting minutes and were introduced as evidence by the Department of Justice in a case. They were made public during the 2008 Holy Land Foundation trial, in which prosecutors uncovered the network channeling money to Hamas. CAIR was named as an unindicted co-conspirator in that case due to an abundance of evidence that its founders and early funders tied to the Hamas network. Following the trial, the FBI officially severed all formal ties with CAIR, while the Bureau's leadership warning that CAIR and its executives were intimately connected to extremism. Beyond the courtroom, revelations about CAIR started to become even more troubling. CAIR's reputation had been further clouded by the actions of foreign governments. In 2014, the United Arab Emirates, a close United States ally, designated CAIR as a terrorist organization, lumping it on a list alongside al-Qaeda and ISIS. UAE officials cited CAIR's links to the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas. While some argued the designation was politically motivated, it underscored how CAIR's international dealings and suspected foreign funding sources set it apart from typical U.S. civil rights groups. Let's fast forward to 2023. After Hamas's brutal October 7th attack on Israel, CAIR's leadership made inflammatory remarks that many interpreted as justifying or celebrating the attack. For example, a CAIR chapter head infamously declared Israel had it coming. That was on October 7th. In response, even the Biden administration's White House disavowed CAIR, with a spokesperson condemning the group's rhetoric and making clear it does not speak for American Muslims. Several state governments, Florida, Arizona, Arkansas, and others, have since introduced resolutions urging cutting off any official engagement with CAIR specifically. Against this backdrop, the prospect that money from CAIR, potentially even foreign-sourced money, found its way into a New York City election takes on a grave cast. Republican lawmakers in Congress certainly saw it that way. In late 2025, Representative Elise Stefanik, a Republican from New York, and Senator Tom Cotton, a Republican from Arkansas, publicly urged the U.S. Treasury Department to investigate whether CAIR is being bankrolled by Hamas or other foreign extremists, and whether such funds have impacted the United States. They pointed to testimony in recent congressional hearings alleging that CAIR had received seed money from Hamas itself in its early years. That allegation, if proven, would mean that any money flowing from CAIR into American elections is not just a domestic campaign finance violation, but part of a transnational channel of illicit funds connected to terrorism. These facts may be uncomfortable for some. By Election Day, November 4th, 2025, the cumulative evidence painted a startling picture. Zohran Mandani won the New York City mayoral historic victory. He was championed as a man of the people, despite the fact that only 1 in 9 New Yorkers voted for him. He claimed it was a historic victory, making him the city's first Muslim and first socialist mayor in modern times. His triumph was powered by an official grassroots campaign flush with small donations, according to the official story. This garnered the energetic support of progressive activists because they thought he was a man of the people. Behind those public optics lays an unmistakable imprint of CAIR's influence. Through a lattice of nonprofits and PACs sharing addresses and agendas, CAIR and its allies had inserted themselves as key financiers of Mamdani's rise. The Unity and Justice Fund Super PAC, created and steered by CAIR's C4 arm, injected $120,000 in Mamdani's election. CAIR operatives openly took credit for this feat and signaled expectations of policy payback by Mamdani. All of these facts are drawn from public records, campaign filings, court exhibits, and the participants' own statement, including Sarsour. Together, they raise pressing questions now facing New Yorkers and regulators alike. Did foreign funds, whether from Hamas-linked individuals or their overseas sources, indirectly bankroll a U.S. municipal election via nonprofit cutouts? At what point does close coordination between a candidate and an independent expenditure group cross the line into illegally receiving funds connected to terrorism? Mamdani's team insists that any improper donations have been refunded. That's not true. And that they followed the law. That's probably not true. But the documented sustained pattern of irregular contributions and opaque funding routes has already prompted criminal referrals to the Justice Department and the Manhattan DA's office. As a federal criminal defense attorney, I will tell you that the picture that's being painted is startling. Federal and state investigators will ultimately make the legal determinations, but what is clear is a sophisticated network of shell organizations and advocacy nonprofits connected to Hamas exploited campaign finance systems. CAIR, a tax-exempt charity barred from politics, leveraged its affiliate and super PAC to become a major kingmaker in New York City's election, all while under the cloud of a terror financing investigation and clear FBI connections to Hamas and terrorism, even designated a terrorist organization by the UAE. Every entity in this network needs to be looked at. Their donations need to be uncovered. And we need to see if the king of New York is in fact the king of Hamas. A newly elected mayor now takes office amid whispers that foreign designated terrorist organizations played a role in his ascent. What I'm going to talk to you about today is how Hamas made a king in New York. I'm going to show you how the funding that Mamdani received is politically connected to Hamas, according to the FBI, the DOJ, and how his vocal advocates and supporters have urged that once he gets in office, he needs to pay back those powerful donors. Today, I'm going to talk to you about CAIR, foreign funding, campaign financing, and the mayor of New York's connection to it. And I'm going to lay brick by brick how the DOJ will likely make its case into terror-connected financing of a U.S. municipal election. I'm Ron Chapman. This is Off Air. Thank you for joining me. By the end of this episode, you will see that this election is not clean and that there is terrorism funding ultimately in the coffers of the current New York mayor.